Buddy Rich said, "Rick Stepton is the best lead trombonist I've ever had in my band." Rick has toured with the orchestras of Buddy Rich, Woody Herman, Lee Castle, Jimmy Dorsey, Artie Shaw, Chuck Mangione, and Maynard Ferguson. He recently played with the Greg Hopkins Jazz Orchestra and the Mark Marquis Group for the Farm Fresh Jazz Festival featuring Tom Harrell at Hollis Hills Farm on the 4th of July this year. He has performed in practically every U.S. state and in Canada, Mexico, Europe, South America, and the Far East. Rick has recorded with Buddy Rich, Woody Herman, Orange, Then Blue, and Gunther Schuller. He's appeared on the Johnny Carson and Ed Sullivan television shows and has made several appearances on BBC TV and Jazz Radio Canada.
We went up to Davis Street and Simon Street. I couldn't remember which house was his.
Well, it's right on the corner of Davis and Simon. It's the one that sits right in that.
It's a little house?
It's a little single-family house. It's not all surrounded by triple deckers.
When we were in the 8th grade,
B.F. Brown.
and one day, for some reason, Ricky and I found ourselves outside the door waiting to see our guidance teacher, Lyman Sleeper. He had a series of facial tics. His face was always in motion. He had big white eyebrows. They were like caterpillars. He kind of crawled on his face. He had these jowls. And the most amazing thing about him was he was deaf as a post. And he had an old-fashioned hearing aid. There was a large button in his ear.
And he had a little box here, and it was about the size of
a Walkman. It had knobs on it. And when he talked to you, he was always adjusting these knobs to try to tune you in. He was the first one to go in, and he didn't really know any of us by name, so he asked me my name, obvious thing to do. And at that time in my life, I stuttered badly. And one of the things that people who stutter get caught on very often is simply saying their name. So I'm standing there, and Mrs. Sleeper is like, "All right, young man, who are you? What's your name?" And my mouth is opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. I simply could not say, "I'm Bill Joyner." And Mr. Sleeper, of course, thought there was something wrong with his hearing aid. So he's adjusting these knobs, and his eyebrows are crawling like this, and I'm panicking, and nothing is coming out of my mouth. And Ricky is standing behind me, and immediately he knew me, and he knew my affliction, and he had, with great presence of mind, and very gallantly, stepped around and introduced me to Lyman Sleeper. He said, "Mr. Sleeper, this is my friend Bill Joyner." And Mr. Sleeper heard that, and it solved the problem beautifully. But I was so worked up and upset at this point that my response was to get mad at Ricky. I looked at him and I said, "Rick, I know my name." And Ricky simply said, he was taken aback, and Ricky said, "Well, sometimes you have a little trouble getting it out." It was very characteristic of Rick. It was a kind gesture that most kids don't show to each other. Rick would, most kids would, seeing me, would just delight in letting me hang there and suffer, and turn in the wind.
At least start that was a cute house.
It is.
All the dangerous thoughts were first nurtured up there. The President of the United States should have a PhD in ecology. And if they knew that, they wouldn't need to know anything else. Because if you have a PhD in ecology, you know the one word that is important in life, and that's symbiosis. And the fact that we're all in this together. There's no way you can go wrong if you know that you're entitled to everything I'm entitled to. Just by the fact that you were born. And if I deny you one little thing, I take a chance of you stealing my car. I ain't gonna deny you that. The key, and being yourself and finding a role for yourself in life and knowing what that role is and sticking to it. I don't go into other people's backyards and take money away from them by either having too many jobs or too many kids or too many bad habits or too many stupid desires. I don't have those goals so that I would go out there and try to make more money than the next person because I need more money, and therefore I'm creating less money for that person that might ultimately steal my car or kill my kids or rape my wife. I'm not exactly sure when I wrote it, but when I write my compositions, I usually write them on my trombone. I'll be practicing and I'll just all of a sudden get this inspiration to play a melody, and this one came out and it just sounded to me like Buddy Rich, and it was just my tribute to him. You might get a buzz from caffeine and get that happy little endorphin popping and write a tune like da ba doo da ba doo da da ba da da ba da da doo da, and it just sounds like Buddy Rich. And most of my songs were written that way while I was playing, and I would just be tooling around, you know, ba-doo, boo, 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 and all of a sudden I go ba-ba-doo-da, ba-doo-doo, da-ba-doo-da, ba-doo-da, doo-doo. Well, I think I'll keep on going, da-ba-doo-da, you know, and sometimes it came out all the way, sometimes it went into the drawer. I worked with him many, many different times. I joined him in May of 1968, and the last time I worked with him was in January of 1986. And I worked with him off and on through the years. The biggest run was 2.5 years when I first joined him. I remember the first night I joined Buddy Rich's band, I thought I was inside the back end of an airplane, and it was nothing but extreme. It was like this huge, sitting inside a huge ball of energy, like almost in an electric chair kind of feeling, only not death, life. You know, it was it's just very hard to explain when you have like several musicians that are there for the same reason, playing at the peak of their ability, or at least making the attempt, and the band leaders were all virtuosos, and it was just an amazing experience. It was very tough. Being on the road was extremely tough, and I defy anybody to do 500 miles a night after the job and sit there like a choir boy. And that's when the partying usually happened on the bus, and then everybody would pass out and wake up in the next town and do it all over again. So you do that for about 15 years, and you got some chromosome problems, you know. But thankfully we have enough to go around. He was a great dancer himself. He was sort of like a Sammy Davis Jr., except his voice was not, his voice was good. He made some singing albums. When he had a series of heart attacks and he tried to make it as a singer, he was extremely talented. He supported his family from the time he was 3 years old.
Wow.
So he loved dancing. You know, I come from a family of trombones. I always say that it's like slide in the family bone. And we played with a lot of the unions were big in those days, and they had town bands. Town bands were all the rage, like with Sousa type bands. And there were like 3 in the area that were union: the Ashby Band, the Fitchburg Band, and the Leominster Band, which was called the Italian Colonia Band. I believe that is the oldest of the local bands. There is still a town band in Lunenburg, but it's non-union. There's one in Concord that's non-union. There's one in Townsend that's non-union, and it's still going on. But as a way of as an entertainment, it's no longer, or it's really fading out. In those days, we used to do band concerts like 3-4 nights a week. People would sit in their cars and eat popcorn and drink soda and beep their horns after every Sousa march, and it was a great way to learn how to play, because the rhythm of the march, and we talked about this earlier, the heartbeat, it's all coordinated, like the heartbeat is almost like at a quarter note equals 60, which is like 1, 2, and then a march is just double that. Da, 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 da. So it's very lively, and maybe that's where a lot of rhythm started happening early in life, was through the ritual of metered marching or metered dancing, and I always mention to students of mine that I developed my peripheral vision by marching in parades and dodging the droppings from the horses when they were in front of the band. And of course we played trios and duos and solos, and it was tremendous. They had sing-alongs, and in those days, right up probably until the 70s, you were still pretty vibrant, and now it's sort of like a lost art, if you will, the town band where the community went out, and kids and all, and they all liked the same music and beeped their horns and applauded and hung out, and I could still smell the popcorn coming off the cart in Ashby. And they used to have the church dinners and the bean suppers, and geez, it was a great time, and that was those were my first professional gigs. And you talk about influences, I think they were a tremendous influence. I basically would have stayed with him forever if I'd have known how much he liked me, but I had many stage fright and inferiority complex issues, and I figured I'd always leave him before he fired me. But he was always asking me back, and then in later years I found out how much he admired me, and if I had known that, I would have stayed with him it would have ended up being 18 years. The gigs were always better with Buddy. He played the better gigs, but his temper was legendary, and he never yelled at me, but it's not easy to see people being yelled at all the time, and it's kind of puts you under pressure. I don't know why he had the temper he did, probably because he was abused as a child and had to make a living for his family from the time he was 3 years old, and his friends were all becoming stars like Frank Sinatra, and just because Buddy played drums, he wasn't as famous as Frank, but he certainly could play the drums as well as Frank could sing, if not better. But that's the way it goes. Vocalists are more popular. And maybe Frank was a little bit better looking, who knows.
What did you say? Slow down. I'm not going to say it again. Ben, better stay on top. I'm not going to tell you again. Right with me. That's good. Hold on.
I was in awe of his professionalism and his solo ability, and he just he's one of a kind, and to be part of that is something special. And people always ask me how I was playing with Buddy. I guess I've always had a sense of individuality, and which, if you really think about it, demands self-discipline. If you're not going to be getting yourself fired everywhere you go by being different, you've got to toe the line in some kind of ways. And it seems to me I knew what he wanted. He just wanted you to sit there and take care of business. When he said bow, you got up and bowed. You paid attention to him without staring at him. You just put as much into your music as he put into his. And it was sort of like a combination. But I think the self-discipline part, I always knew what was expected of me, no matter what band I went on. But I would never be obsequious, or I would never acquiesce to subservience. I always had to be myself.
He just lived for music, so I was happy for him in that regard. Hi, I'm Bea, and Rick is my son. Started playing trombone when he was 8 years old, at the persuasion of his grandfather, I'm sure, who was his teacher. And I remember thinking when he first started playing, and I said, how's he can't reach the end of the slide, how's he going to reach those notes? And that bothered me because he was so small. So I remember when he was in high school, he had this little band with neighborhood boys. I was the Hooper boy and the Healy boy. And they would practice Moon River forever and a day in my kitchen. I didn't care if I ever heard that song again. But the sun rose, set in him, and Marcia would get left behind.
And Marcia and I got along great. She didn't hold that against me. She got involved in dancing, and she got involved in rock and roll and 45s and teeny bopper stuff, and I was into music. So our careers were at variance even then. The remarkable thing is we had a great childhood together. Mm-hmm. With a lot of mutual respect.
He had twin beds, and he'd go to bed at night, and he'd lay out all his clothes for the next day on the other twin bed, all laid out like this. He's a clutterer now.
We were financially challenged. We got presents on birthdays and Christmas only, but there wasn't a bit of unhappiness in that family at all. It was like nothing but a great memory. I went into the Army, and then things changed. But even then, until Dad started drinking a lot, it's always been a very loving family.
The Business and Professional Women, or BPW as it's called, is a national organization. And I became a member in Lindstedt. And shortly after I became a member, I really got enthused with it, and I became local president and eventually state president of it. And I think that being in BPW made me grow a lot, because I met so many interesting women in different fields, and I would go to conventions and I would meet more people there in all the different states. And it made me grow as a person. They had political seminars, and they had different, how can I say it? They had foundations. It was a typical organization for people who were in business or professional life. We went down to Lenny's on the Turnpike in Peabody, it's a jazz club there, and Buddy Rich was playing there, and Rick had to sit in. And that was when he was hired. He sat in. I remember the tune he played was Mercy, Mercy. And I was so proud. Of course, Rick's always been excellent at sight reading, so I wasn't afraid that he couldn't read the music sight unseen, because he was always very good at that.
I joined the band after the gig at a rehearsal that started after midnight, and Phil Wilson, who got me the gig on Buddy Rich's band and was my trombone instructor at Berkeley, brought in Mercy, 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 and we rehearsed it that night. Eventually, a couple months later, recorded it, and it almost won a Grammy. It was my first recorded album with Buddy Rich. I had the job, but I had to do the rehearsal. Well, if I'd have clammed, I wouldn't have had the job. You know, the next gig was at 10 o'clock in the morning on the Mike Douglas show in Philadelphia. And I had to sleep on the floor of one of the trumpet players' rooms and then get up and go into Philadelphia and sight read the West Side Story medley live on TV. Never introduced my parents to Buddy Rich or anybody thinking that that's what everybody does. I said, I never even thought that they might want to meet Buddy Rich, but I always thought, well, that's not what people do, is it's kind of obsequious, and so I never did it. And then when we did the Buddy Rich tribute in '85, and Mom came out to see the band, with Buddy's band, she went up to him after his set and said, she says, "I'm Rick's mother. Rick wants a T-shirt and there's none left." And he took off his T-shirt and gave it to her, right? Yeah. So I go into the bathroom at Lenny's on the Turnpike. I'm in there taking a leak, and the guy next to me, who was my grandfather, he walks in and starts taking a leak, and he says, "I bet you don't remember me." My grandfather. So did he disown me or not? But he never showed any indication that he was proud of the fact that I was a featured player with Buddy Rich's band, and because he didn't like the style. Tommy Dorsey was his man. If you didn't play like Tommy Dorsey or Jack Teagarden, you weren't worth anything.
At the Wayland Park Ballroom, when Tommy Dorsey was there, Rick was there with his grandfather when he was, I think, 12 years old. I don't know if I got the age right. And Grandpa Steppe went up to Tommy Dorsey and says, "My grandson can play sentimental over you and hit all the high notes." And so Rick thought he was going to have to play for Tommy. I guess it practically paralyzed you, didn't it? But it was, that was the kind of thing that Grandpa Steppe would do. I keep saying Grandpa Steppe, that's his trombone player, teacher. My mother and father were divorced when I was 12 and my brother was 7. And that was quite a change in my life. My mother moved to Boston, and we went to live with my paternal grandparents, my brother and I. And it was after that, after my father remarried, that he was involved with the FBI. I know he was asked by the FBI to see what he could find out about the communism. NGE, they said it was very prevalent. So he was in the union at that time, so he had quite a few contacts. And he did do quite a bit. He got quite a few people involved. And I remember when he was involved in this, they told him to get a gun to protect himself. And it was so funny because he would put it in a paper bag and go to the dump and try to shoot rats. He never did get the knack of a gun. I remember when Rick was, I think, 9, and his sister 7, that the photographers came and took our picture, and they dragged him out of school. And so it was quite a sensation at that time.
But the reason that Grandpa Bill was asked to have a gun is because in those days, counter spies were shot and killed.
I said to protect himself.
Yeah, but it was also, when we were taken out of school, was so we wouldn't get kidnapped.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And so, because the FBI took us out of school so the commies wouldn't kill us or kidnap us,
to get at our grandfather.
That's right, I forgot that part.
Yeah, and we used to, there was big meetings down at the Hotel Raymond, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that Grandpa Bill died in 1951. I think the McCarthy shit really hit the fan in 2 and 3, around the same time as the Korean War. So he's exonerated. And he was brainwashed into becoming a patriot.
Yeah, he thought he was doing the right thing.
Yeah, you know.
I think he was about 16, and he used to play with all the bands around town when they'd hire him, and he was hired at the Fitchburg Elks. I said fine, he could play there, but then I heard that one night they were going to have a stripper. And I said, well, Rick, I don't want you playing with a stripper there, but you can play if you promise to go outside when the stripper comes on. So he said, okay. And I wasn't quite sure how this was going to work, so I walked down there, and there he was out in the fire escape. He went into the Army, as they told him he would be in the Army band. So that was 59 when he graduated from high school. And he went to Fort Stewart, and after boot camp, I remember he came home from boot camp, and I looked at him, I said, Rick, I said, you went away a blonde and you came back brown hair, and I said, you changed. And I guess you do change a lot when you go through boot camp.
Basic training, I went to the Naval School of Music. Then I went to Fort Stewart, then I went to France.
My husband started playing, I think he was in his 30s. He didn't start until quite late. All of a sudden, I guess he enjoyed listening to you guys play, so he thought he'd take it up. And he had his own little band, his little quartets around, and so he played mostly jazz, Dixieland jazz, but the real modern jazz that Rick plays and Rick likes, I never really knew until he sent back records from when he got out of the Army. And there was Jerry Mulligan and Big Spidervick and Buddy Rich and everybody. Art Blakey, he was one of my favorites. And so then I became a real jazz lover. I think I like the beat. It's a happy music. It's I don't know, it just gets to you when it's on. I want to start dancing and I want to start moving around. And of course I liked jazz singers too. I liked Ella Fitzgerald and Joe Williams. They were my two favorites.
With all that racism in the early days, my mom is so refreshingly free of it. That's been my example. I never have had a prejudiced bone in my body, and I think I have her genes in that regard, because she has no prejudice in her at all. You can't draw it out of her. Dad's group, it was a 5-piece band that my dad had called the Knights of Rhythm. My grandfather had a band called the Musical Bellhops, and that was a 5- and 6-piece band. They were usually like 3 horns and rhythm, bass, piano, drums, trumpet, clarinet, or saxophone, and trombone. Here's my career in a nutshell. It started when I was 8, took lessons with my grandfather, worked in a lot of town bands, listened to a lot of records, big band Dixieland, went in the Army. I played in Army bands for 3 years, went over to France for a couple of years and played with some little jazz bands there. Started to learn a little bit more about improvising. I got out of the Army, I went on the road. I went on the road with territory bands. Those were bands that played around in certain areas, like what they call the Bible Belt, which is the South, the Grain Belt, which was the Midwest. We traveled back and forth. One of the bands had a sleeper bus. We'd sleep on it and travel 600 miles a night, back and forth, thousands and thousands of miles, making $90 a week. One of the bands paid $90 in pink checks. The only place you could cash them was a gay bar. I went on the Lee Castle Jimmy Dorsey band, which was called a Ghost Band. It was a first name band. I decided I didn't know enough about music, so I took the GI Bill, we got paid just enough money to go to 4 semesters at Berkeley. And luckily enough, I got a job on Buddy Rich's band through Phil Wilson, who I had met in the Army and who I also studied with at Berkeley. Then from Buddy's band, I got onto Woody's band. And from Woody's band, I went out to Canada and played with a rock band called Lighthouse. It was like Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago. Then from there, I got the Maynard Ferguson gig, and then I saw Buddy again, and Buddy asked me back on his band, and I went back on his band in 1976. Played there until I got mono in 1977. Went to Boston, started teaching at Berkeley 1978. Taught there for 4 years, got all messed up on cocaine and drinking too much, and got rid of all of that, and went back with Buddy in 82, 86. And then I settled down in Boston for 21 years, and then I decided that I would, piss on all that money and go to New York. I went there for 9 years, came back when I turned 65 because I didn't want to die in New Jersey, and here I am. That's my career. The one thing I try not to do, I believe in Pinocchio, try not to lie or exaggerate my resume, because my ears are big, but I don't want my nose to grow anymore. May 26th, 1968, Buddy Rich's band. This picture is Jerry Martell, the owner of the Fitchburg Music Store. I was going to the Berklee College of Music at the time and doing local gigs. And Jerry had teachers that would teach at his music store. And he also had a fairly decent supply of instruments. So when I got the gig to go with Buddy Rich, Jerry had to supply me with a horn. So he says, Richard A. Stepton, son of Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence Stepton, Jr. of 7 Hopkins Street, Leominster, makes an important stop at the Fitchburg Music Store to buy from Jerry Martell a professional musician's trombone. The instrument will accompany Stepton on to the West Coast, where he will join the world-famed Buddy Rich Band. The 26-year-old musician developed a musical interest at an early age. His father and grandfather, considered 2 of the area's leading trombone players for many years, were his teachers. We did make an album there, the Mercy Mercy album, which almost won a Grammy. Jazz Up Your World with Buddy Rich. Buddy Rich, the world famous. Buddy Rich, the world's greatest drummer. WGD Incorporated. And that meant world's greatest drummer. Opening June 27th in the Circus Maximus, Tony Bennett, Buddy Rich, and his orchestra. Caesar's Palace welcomes you to a live recording session. This will be Buddy Rich's 5th album on Pacific Jazz. Art Pepper's impeccable alto in front of a typically winsome Don Peistrup arrangement of Alfie and Jim Trimble and Rick Stepton trading trombone 12s on The Rotten Kid. When Sue and I got married July 1st at the Las Vegas Chapel, it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and I had invited the night before everybody naturally to come to the wedding. And when I asked Buddy, Buddy just looked at me and said, "You'll be sorry." They didn't show up, none of them. Too early, I guess. Mercy Mercy, again, we almost won a Grammy for that. That was Phil Wilson's chart. That was like a big thing with Cannonball Adderley's band. Joe Zawinul, the piano player, wrote it, and Phil Wilson, who got me on Buddy's band, He's a very, very close friend of mine. He wrote this Mercy Mercy chart, and when I joined the band, I joined at Lenny's on the Turnpike after the gig, and my first gig with Buddy was sight reading Mercy Mercy. My next gig was in Philadelphia with the Mike Douglas show at 10 o'clock in the morning. Sight reading West Side Story, that was a good one. The last show at this gig was 4 o'clock in the morning, I'll never forget it. We hated it, and this is the blurb from it. Las Vegas, Nevada. Nero's Nook it was called. When I was managing Buddy Rich's band, one of my jobs was I did it for 3 months, it was awful. One of my jobs was to collect the money. And in those days, well, of course, excuse me, the Fillmore East was in the East Village. Rather dangerous area of New York. You're talking 1968 now. 68, 69. I went up to Bill Graham after the gig. I think we were on with Steppenwolf and Spirit. And we played Fillmore West also. But I went up to Bill Graham after the gig and I said, Buddy Rich, manager, and it was $5,000 was the fee, and I was paid in $5 bills because that was the admission. So $5,000 worth of $5 bills. I said, what am I going to do with this? I'm staying uptown. I'm staying midtown, and I'm afraid to bring this stuff home. I mean, how am I supposed to? And he gave me a big paper bag, and he shoved all the fives in the big paper bag and said, "Go home on the subway. They'll think it's your lunch." The Hong Kong bar where Rich's band was playing was dark that night. Don Menza sat in on tenor saxophone, and Rich's lead trombonist, Rick Stepton, subbed for Peistrup's trombonist. Besides Holman, other arrangers for Buddy include Don Peistrup and Alan Ferguson. They write straight-ahead music with few breathing spaces, but plenty of short solo spots. Consequently, I want to hear more from trombonist Rick Stepton. New Buddy Rich is very much today. Vancouver, Canada. Saw my name in printing these days, I flipped out. Petula Clark Show with Buddy Rich, May 17th, 1969. Rich Band Ignores Past, The Groove in the Present, May 28th, 1969, Columbus, Ohio. Super drummer to repeat at prom, also known as Mr. Humble.
Did he practice?
No. He started entertaining professionally when he was 3 years old in vaudeville, and he basically is still supporting his family. Well, yeah, this was from I never understood this. St. Paul Dispatch, Friday, June 13th, 1969. Super drummer wows prom crowd. Soloists were Dave Dana, a sensitive soloist, guitar, Bob Yance, the top modernist in the band, Sal Marquez, trumpets, the latter the screecher, Richard Stepton, trombone, the darling of the audience. If I was that much of a darling, why didn't he talk about me more? Diana Ross and the Supremes singing a medley of their hits last night at the Garden State Arts Center. Stevie Wonder wails a song at the Garden State Arts Center. July 15th, 1969. We were the band for everything. Okay, O.C. Smith. Little Green Apples in the Summertime. July 69, John S. Wilson. Procol Harum, we played with them too. This was at Central Park. Queen of England. Buddy Rich. We played with Tom Jones and Herb Albert. This guy, the Danny LaRue, the female impersonator, I stood next to him backstage. There's an aura that different people give off. Different, but meaning exceptional, meaning whatever. When I was out with the band one time on
home during a vacation, and Buddy's on the Tonight Show and talking about legalizing marijuana. And I'm sitting with my folks on the couch watching the show and popping a few beers, and Johnny says, "Do all the guys in the band smoke?" And Buddy says, "Yeah, are you kidding?" I almost sunk under the cushions, but I've always been open with my folks about all that stuff. You couldn't beat Buddy in an argument because he'd just say "fuck you" and walk away. That was one of my favorite of my own quotes. Somebody asked me what Buddy Rich taught me, and I said he taught me that one "fuck you" was worth 1,000 words. How do you think you would be if you were as good as, if not better, than anyone doing what you do? How would you be? How would you behave? Would you have an ego? Would you be arrogant? It's hard to say, isn't it? This is 1970 now, and they were getting high with some really good reefer, and the guy says to Buddy, like, what have you got these guys dressed in business suits for? They're playing at all these rock palaces, and why don't you have them dressed the way they want? What we would call dress to impress these days. So Buddy gets all stoned up and he says, "Oh yeah, that's it. You're gonna be able to wear whatever you want from now on." So most of us went out and got kind of appropriate, fancy-ish type clothes. And Richie Cole came in one day with a pair of jeans on with a hole in the ass, and that ended that. But Buddy said that Willard Alexander's office in New York, the booker, the phone was ringing off the hook that they couldn't tell who the band was because they didn't have uniforms. Rick Stepton is a superb trombone soloist. About time. Scott's Club, very famous jazz club in England, in London, Soho. Buddy Rich Band, Rick Stepton trombone, October 31st, 1970. I'm slowly wending my way back home. We're almost done. Jazz at Newport, Buddy Rich, Brussels, Belgium, and hear about that. But when I got off the band, December 7th, 1970, leaving the band at Lenny's on the Turnpike where I had joined it, I just had enough. There was a situation that happened in Germany about full salaries and stuff, and in those days thought it was better to play with a lot of different people. Nowadays I would have probably stayed with Buddy Rich, although I had a lot of great experiences that I would never have gotten. So anyway, I'm on my way back home, finally deciding to quit, and the job ends, and my friend Bill Jamsa, who was from Westminster. I played with him for many, many years. He called me up and he said, well, now that you've played, he was commenting on my performance at Lenny's on the Turnpike, which he had come to see, and was very chagrined to hear that I had given my notice. So he says, what are you going to do now? And I said, I don't know. I said, I have a chance to go on Woody Herman's band that might come through, which it did. And he says, well, how is it going to be? You've played with the best. What are you going to do now? I said, I'm just going to keep on with my career. The next day he called me and said, did you see the latest Downbeat magazine? And I said, no. At the time I was voted the 11th best jazz trombone player in the world. If I'd have stayed on Buddy's band, I would have been able to exploit that. But among the bright solo stars, alto man Richie Cole and trombonist Rick Stepton. Now I ask you, trombone, number 1, J.J. Johnson, number 11, Rick Stepton. I actually got 102 votes. I went on to Woody's band the next year and I came in 56th. I went up to him on the Holiday Inn and knocked on the door and said, Woody, I'd just like to tell you I had a great time playing with you. I'm leaving tonight. And he had a beer in his hand. He just slammed the door in my face. John S. Wilson, he was the jazz critic for the New York Times. On this disc, Buddy is less the flashy star than the stimulator and motivator. His solos, relatively brief, are only part of a set that has excellent arrangements by Don Peistrup, Roger Newman, and Bill Holman, and a strong lineup of soloists, notably Richie Cole on alto saxophone, George Zonce on trumpet, and particularly Rick Stepton on trombone. Stepton ranges from a dark, brery, funky attack that could be a cross between Bill Harris and Jack Teagarden, and a soaring, slippery virtuosity that is reminiscent of some of Phil Wilson's work with Woody Herman. Stepton has a fascinating array of colors and accents, and fortunately he gets a chance on Everybody's Talking to show off a good share of them. Holy shit, huh? March 1971. Of course, I had already shot myself in the foot and gone somewhere else. What an asshole.
I always have dogs. I started adopting dogs in 1977. Always had a couple of cats and a dog around. I have my dog Kelly, the first dog I ever got. I had her up in Toronto with me. I did a one-nighter, and Buddy Rich came up to me and says, what are you doing in Canada? Why don't you come back on my band? I said, I can't, Buddy, I got a dog. He said, what do you mean you got a dog? I said, I got a dog. He says, you'd rather have a dog than be on my band? I said, hey. He says, I gotta meet that fucking dog. So in 1992, I met the woman who was to become my second wife after a 25-year lapse. Well, this job here in Worcester is my third CD release party, and this CD is called Stiff Upper Lip, and it was recorded in November. I had moved to New York in September, and I came back to do it, and we're just here celebrating the release of it. The reason I chose Stiff Upper Lip for the title is dedication to the plastic surgeon that sewed up my lip after this unfortunate accident I had with a dog biting, virtually severing my upper lip, a large chunk of it. So I dedicated this song to him. I basically bent down to pat a dog that was a neighbor's dog, and it jumped up and seemed to grab my upper lip with just one tooth or something, but it ripped it off. And it fell down so that I was able to see it peripherally, and I actually caught it, and then I put it back. This was in December of '92, And I was rushed to the emergency ward, and my wife kept on saying, we just can't have anybody sew him up because he's a trombone player and he needs it to be sewn up exactly the way it was before he got bit. Basically, he used hundreds of stitches to sew it back together again using microsurgery, getting all the blood vessels back, and he then had to see whether or not it would adhere and whether or not it would function, whether blood would flow. And he said if it didn't, he was going to have to put leeches on it like they used to do in the old days. I basically went to his office and I could play a few notes. It was really excruciatingly painful, and I just did one note at a time for maybe 3 months. And I started playing again, and I just took it easy. I wouldn't play lead trombone. I would play section parts. I wouldn't take long solos. I just basically played it pretty cautious for about a year. But there is scar tissue, and it is numb, and it doesn't buzz, which is part of the way you make a sound. But I just have learned how to, I relearned how to play the trombone so that I could accommodate that by letting my body tell me what it needed to do to reproduce the sound that I needed to hear. I just did chromatic scales, agonizing long tones for months and months at a time.
Thank you. Bob Galati on the drums. Bronek Suhanek on bass. John Wilkins on guitar. I'm Rick Stepton, and that was a song that I entitled Stiff Upper Lip, dedicated to the plastic surgeon that took care of me a few years back when I had an unfortunate accident with a dog. It is also the title of our newest CD, which is why we're here celebrating our 3rd CD.
Technique called multiphonics. The overtone series have certain partials, like vibrations. This multiphonics is a thing where you can play the root of a chord, which is the 1st degree of a scale, say the F scale. You sing you play the F on your instrument. You sing the 5th higher, which is the C. F, G, A, B flat, C. For those with perfect pitch, I was probably off, but I might have been close. And the 3rd comes out in the overtone series through some miracle. So if you play the 1st degree and sing the 5th degree, the 3rd of the chord comes out automatically. So you're playing, singing, and this comes out. So all 3 sound, and it goes something like this. Well, you're singing through your throat, so your throat is open. So you got to keep it in the same position. See, I'm singing that note. So yeah, and it hurts your throat. That's why I don't do it. I might end one of my tunes on my album this way. It's called Blues for the Bone, and it ends like. There's a German trombone player named Albert Mangelsdorf that perfected this to an art, and he does a little thing where he plays a rhythmic thing and then improvises on top of it. He goes. And he accompanies himself. If you want to learn how to tongue, your tongue has to do that in the mouthpiece, just like I did it, like this. Case closed. Do it. Somebody says, "How do you be yourself?" Who else can you be? Do you know what it means to be yourself? Well, you should. You're the only one that's you.
If anybody wants to come to the stage and dance, feel free to do so. You're invited, you know, this is your party, and thanks for the invitation. I want to thank David and Colette.
The time has come, the walrus said, to speak of many things, of sealing wax and jazz with Mark Marquis Group.
Look at this, George Wallace Civic Center, June 23rd, 1970. County Talent. On the bandstand next Tuesday, when the fabled drummer Buddy Rich and his big band blasts Wallace Civic Center, or Wallace Center, Rick Stepton, the top drawer trombonist from Lunenburg, occupies lead chair.
Well, in June of 1970, a couple of friends of mine, Dick Boudreau and Lloyd LeBlanc Sr., and myself booked the Buddy Rich Band into the Wallace Civic Center, which was brand new. It had just opened about 5 or 6 months earlier. And we thought, number one, the Rich Band being popular, Buddy had made several appearances on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Added to that, the fact that Fitchburg's own Rick Stepton was playing lead trombone in the band. We thought this was just going to be a great event. So the day of the event, which was June 23rd, the three of us, Dick and Lloyd and myself, were at the Civic Center all day getting ready for the event. At about 4:30 in the afternoon, somebody said, "They're here." So we went out front, and sure enough, a bus had pulled up in front of the Civic Center. The entire Buddy Rich Band came out of the bus, except Buddy. Where's Buddy? He's coming on his own. He's driving his own car. Okay. Well, a couple hours passed. We were getting a little antsy, but all of a sudden somebody said, "He's here. He's parked out in back." So I went outside to the back of the Civic Center. I had been designated as sort of the MC of the evening. And sure enough, parked out back was Buddy, standing next to his car, which was this beautiful Jaguar XKE, as I remember. And he's standing next to it on the passenger side, just outside the door. And he's got his elbow on the roof of the car. He's got a cigarette in the other hand, I believe, and he's just kind of looking around. So I went up to him and I said, "Hi, Buddy. My name is Dave Svens, and I'll be introducing the band tonight." I don't even remember if he acknowledged what I had said. But anyway, I'm trying to make a little small talk. So I says, "Well, Buddy, where are you going from here?" Still with the elbow on the top of the car, still with a cigarette, and he starts looking around. And the only time he made eye contact with me, he looks at me and he says, "Where the fuck am I?" That's Buddy.